Every night, children disappear from their beds. They climb invisible vines into realms that shouldn't exist. What if Jack and the Beanstalk preserves the memory of something so ancient and terrifying that it predates human civilization itself? Tonight, you'll discover why this story is over 5,000 years old. Why ancient Romans believed bean flowers were eyes of the restless dead. Why the Catholic Church forbade telling this tale. And why modern children still vanish near places where the story is told most often. You'll learn about real archaeological evidence suggesting Jack's theft wasn't fiction, but a cosmic crime that shattered balance between worlds. About the otherworld debt accumulating interest for millennia, and why cutting down that beanstalk may have doomed our species to eventual harvest. Some stories preserve memories too dangerous to forget. This one is both a warning and confession about humanity's original sin against cosmic order. The beans have been planted, the stalk is growing, and at the top, something ancient and hungry is waiting. Let's climb. Chapter 1. When Children Fed the Ancient Gods. Deep in the windswept steppes between the Black Sea and Caspian Sea, over 5,000 years ago, a people we now call the Proto-Indo-Europeans gathered around flickering fires to tell a story that would outlive empires. But this wasn't the innocent tale we know today. This was something far more sinister, a ritualistic account of human sacrifice that would echo through millennia. These ancient nomads lived in a world where death gods demanded tribute, where children were offered to ensure the survival of the tribe, and where cannibalistic rituals were performed to appease the hungry spirits of the underworld. The story of Jack wasn't entertainment. It was instruction, a guide for the most horrific ceremony these people ever performed. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan burial mounds reveals the brutal reality of Proto-Indo-European culture. Excavations have uncovered mass graves containing the remains of children, their bones showing clear signs of ritualistic dismemberment. Carbon dating places these sacrificial sites at exactly the same period when linguists believe the Jack story originated. The correlation is chilling and undeniable. The most disturbing discoveries come from sites in what is now Ukraine. Here, excavations revealed evidence of systematic child sacrifice on a scale that defies comprehension. Hundreds of small skeletons, arranged in specific patterns around central fire pits. Cut marks on the bones suggest the children were butchered while still alive, their flesh consumed in ritualistic feasts designed to channel the power of ancient death gods. But perhaps most horrifying of all is the discovery of what researchers call offering stones, massive rock platforms where children were tied down and slowly tortured before being killed. Microscopic analysis of these stones shows traces of human blood that match the genetic markers of the surrounding child remains. These weren't quick deaths. They were prolonged rituals of agony, designed to maximize the spiritual energy released as the young souls departed their bodies. The giants chant, Fee-fi, F-o-fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, takes on a far more sinister meaning when viewed through this lens. Linguistic analysis reveals that these seemingly nonsensical words are actually corrupted fragments of Proto-Indo-European death invocations. When properly translated, they form a ritualistic greeting used by sacrificial priests before consuming human flesh. The phrase, I smell the blood, isn't a threat. It's recognition. The giant is acknowledging the scent of sacrificial blood, the sweet copper smell that marked children as offerings to the death gods. The word Englishman is a later corruption. Originally, it likely referred to small one or young offering, the term used to describe children prepared for sacrifice. Even more disturbing is the phrase, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. Archaeological evidence suggests that Proto-Indo-European death cults actually did grind human bones into flour, mixing it with grain to create ritualistic bread consumed during sacrificial ceremonies. This wasn't metaphor. It was literal cannibalism, sanctified by religious belief and practiced on an industrial scale. The story of Jack climbing the beanstalk begins to make horrific sense when viewed as a preserved memory of these ancient practices. Jack isn't a hero. He's a sacrificial victim, climbing not toward treasure, but toward his own ritualistic death. The tale survived for 5,000 years because it encoded the most important ceremony these ancient people ever performed, the offering of young life, to ensure the continuation of the tribe. And deep in the genetic memory of every human being who has ever heard this story, something ancient and terrible recognizes the truth. We shiver at the giant's chant, not because it's silly, but because our ancestors once whispered those same words while preparing children for slaughter. Chapter 2. Seeds of Death and Souls. The beans in Jack's tale weren't magical. They were cursed. In the shadowy world of ancient death cults, beans held a significance so dark and profound that even speaking of them could bring disaster upon entire communities. These weren't symbols of growth and prosperity. They were gateways to the underworld, seeds of death that connected the living world to the realm of hungry spirits. Across dozens of ancient cultures, from the Mediterranean to the Far East, beans were forbidden foods associated with death, decay, and communication with malevolent spirits. The Pythagoreans of ancient Greece refused to eat them, believing that beans contained the trapped souls of the dead. They taught that when a bean sprouted, it was actually a deceased soul attempting to return to the world of the living, desperate to reclaim its stolen life. But the truth was far more horrifying than even the Pythagoreans understood. Archaeological evidence from Proto-Indo-European sites reveals that beans were specifically cultivated for use in death rituals. They were planted in soil enriched with human blood and bone meal, creating a literal bridge between the decomposing bodies of sacrificial victims and the world above. When Jack trades his family's cow for a handful of beans, he isn't making a foolish bargain. He's accepting an invitation to die. The mysterious stranger who offers the trade is no mere merchant. He's a death priest, recognizing Jack as a suitable sacrifice and providing him with the means to journey to the underworld. The beans are his passage, his ticket to a realm from which no living child has ever returned. The overnight growth of the beanstalk defies natural law because it isn't natural. It's supernatural, a manifestation of the ancient death magic that once terrorized prehistoric communities. The plant doesn't grow up toward the sky. It grows down, its roots boring deep into the earth where countless children have been buried, drawing power from their decomposing remains to fuel its impossible ascent. Shamanic traditions from across the world preserve memories of similar death journeys. In Siberian cultures, shamans describe climbing the world tree to reach the realm of the dead, but these weren't metaphorical journeys. They were literal ascents, climbing sacred poles while under the influence of deadly hallucinogens that would either carry them to the spirit world or kill them in the attempt. The Mayans spoke of the Milky Way as a great tree connecting the world of the living to the realm of death. Children chosen for sacrifice would climb replica trees during religious ceremonies, ascending higher and higher until they reached platforms where priests waited to tear out their still-beating hearts. The higher they climbed, the more sacred their sacrifice became. In Celtic traditions, certain trees were considered cursed, growing from the graves of murdered children and serving as passages for vengeful spirits. Climbing these trees was forbidden, as anyone who ascended too high would be claimed by the angry dead and never return to the world of the living. Jack's beanstalk fits perfectly into this pattern of ancient horror. It's not a path to adventure. It's a ladder to execution, growing from soil soaked with the blood of previous victims and reaching toward a realm where death gods wait to claim fresh sacrifices. The mist that surrounds the beanstalk isn't water vapor. It's the collective breath of the dead, the exhalations of countless children who made the same journey before Jack. As he climbs higher, passing through layer after layer of this ghostly fog, he's literally breathing in the essence of his predecessors, allowing their spirits to enter his body and prepare him for his own inevitable death. When Jack reaches the top and finds the giant's castle, he isn't discovering a new world. He's arriving at his destination, the sacred slaughterhouse where children have been butchered for thousands of years. The giant's wife who greets him isn't showing kindness. She's following ancient protocol, preparing the sacrificial victim with food and warmth before the final ceremony begins. And Jack, innocent and trusting, walks willingly into the trap that has claimed so many before him. The Beanstalk has served its purpose, bridging the gap between the world of the living and the realm of ritualistic death. Soon, it will claim another victim, adding Jack's screams to the chorus of anguish that has echoed from that cursed castle for over 5 millennia. Chapter 3. The Flesh-Eating God in the Clouds. The giant waiting at the top of the Beanstalk isn't a mere monster. He's something far more terrifying, a primordial death god whose hunger for human flesh has been sated by generations of child sacrifice. His massive form, towering above mortal men, reflects the awesome and terrible power of death itself, while his cannibalistic appetite serves as a reminder of humanity's ultimate fate. In the earliest Proto-Indo-European traditions, death gods were depicted as giants of immense proportions, being so large that they could crush entire villages with a single step. These weren't benevolent deities offering peaceful passage to the afterlife. They were monsters of pure appetite, cosmic cannibals who devoured human souls and demanded ever-increasing offerings of fresh meat to maintain their terrible power. Archaeological evidence from ancient Mesopotamian sites reveals the horrifying reality of giant death god worship. Massive stone statues, some over 30 feet tall, depict humanoid figures with grotesquely enlarged mouths filled with rows of sharp teeth. Chemical analysis of these statues shows traces of human blood and bone fragments, suggesting that actual sacrifices were performed in front of these monstrous idols. The most disturbing discoveries come from temple complexes where giant death gods were worshipped through ritualistic cannibalism. Underground chambers contain the remains of hundreds of children, their bones showing clear evidence of being cracked open to extract marrow while the victims were still alive. The walls of these chambers are covered with primitive paintings showing giant figures consuming small human forms, their massive hands stuffing children into cavernous mouths. But perhaps most chilling of all are the feeding tables, massive stone slabs where children were prepared for consumption. These tables feature intricate drainage systems designed to collect blood, and microscopic analysis reveals protein residues consistent with human brain tissue. The children weren't just killed. They were systematically butchered and consumed, their every part used to nourish the giant death gods they served. The giant in Jack's tale exhibits all the characteristics of these ancient cannibalistic deities. His enormous size reflects the cosmic scope of death itself. His castle represents the underworld realm where souls are processed and consumed. His golden treasures symbolize the accumulated life force stolen from countless victims over thousands of years. When the giant chants his famous words, he isn't making idle threats. He's performing a sacred ritual, acknowledging the arrival of fresh sacrifice and preparing to consume another offering. The specific mention of blood reflects the ancient belief that life force resided in the crimson fluid that flowed through mortal veins. By drinking this blood, the giant absorbs the victim's essence, adding their power to his own. The giant's wife plays a crucial role in this horrific system. She isn't showing kindness to Jack by feeding him and hiding him from her husband. She's following ancient protocols for preparing sacrificial victims. In many death cults, offerings were fattened and cared for before slaughter, as the quality of the sacrifice directly influenced the power gained from consuming it. Her warnings about her husband's appetite aren't meant to save Jack. They're designed to increase his fear, as terror was believed to enhance the spiritual energy released at the moment of death. The more frightened the victim, the more nourishing their soul became when consumed by the giant death god. The treasures Jack supposedly steals take on new significance when viewed through this lens. The golden eggs represent the accumulated life force of previous victims, each one containing the compressed essence of a murdered child. The singing harp embodies the voices of the dead, their screams and pleas transformed into haunting melodies that echo through the giant's realm. But Jack doesn't steal these treasures. He's given them, as compensation for becoming the next sacrifice. The giant allows him to take the golden eggs and harp because he knows Jack will never escape alive. These aren't rewards for cleverness. They're funeral gifts, burial goods that will accompany Jack's soul into the underworld. When Jack finally encounters the giant directly, the confrontation isn't between hero and villain. It's between predator and prey, between an ancient god of death and his newest offering. The chase down the beanstalk isn't an escape. It's the final phase of an elaborate ritual, one that will end with Jack's inevitable consumption by the hungry darkness that has claimed so many before him. Chapter 4. The Boy Who Never Came Home. Jack never cut down the beanstalk. Jack never escaped. Jack never lived happily ever after. The traditional ending to this ancient tale is a lie, a sanitized version created to hide the horrific truth of what really happened to the boy who dared to climb into the realm of death. The real ending has been preserved in fragmentary oral traditions found among isolated communities across Eastern Europe, where the story's original horror remains intact. In these versions, Jack's fate is sealed the moment he accepts the beans from the mysterious stranger. He becomes marked for sacrifice, chosen by ancient forces that have been claiming children for over 5,000 years. Archaeological evidence supports this darker interpretation. Excavations at Proto-Indo-European sites have uncovered what investigators call sacrifice ladders, vertical wooden structures that children were forced to climb before being killed. These ladders were often adorned with beans, the cursed seeds that marked the victims as offerings to the death gods. The similarity to Jack's beanstalk is unmistakable and deeply disturbing. The most chilling discoveries come from ritual sites in the Carpathian Mountains, where ancient death cults practiced a ceremony known as the Ascending. Children between the ages of 7 and 12 were selected for this ritual, chosen for their innocence and spiritual purity. They were given sacred beans to eat, which contained powerful hallucinogens that would ease their passage to the underworld. Under the influence of these drugs, the children would experience vivid hallucinations of climbing magical plants that reached into the sky. They would describe encounters with giant beings who offered them treasure and sustenance. But these weren't real experiences. They were drug-induced visions designed to make the children compliant during their final moments. The ceremony would begin at sunset, with the chosen child tied to a tall wooden pole that had been planted in soil enriched with the blood and bone meal of previous victims. As darkness fell, the child would be slowly hoisted higher and higher, their cries echoing across the ritual ground as they ascended toward their death. At the peak of the ceremony, when the child had been raised to the top of the pole, the death priest would perform the final sacrifice. The child's throat would be cut, their blood allowed to flow down the length of the pole and into the prepared soil below. This blood would nourish the cursed beans planted around the base, ensuring that future ceremonies would have the power to claim additional victims. But the sacrifice didn't end with death. The child's body would be lowered and prepared for consumption, their flesh distributed among the cult members in a cannibalistic feast designed to absorb the victim's spiritual energy. The bones would be ground into powder and mixed with grain to create ritualistic bread, while the skull was preserved as a sacred relic. Jack's story preserves the memory of these horrific ceremonies with disturbing accuracy. His climb up the beanstalk mirrors the ascent of sacrificial victims up the ritual poles. His encounters with the giant and his wife reflect the drug-induced hallucinations experienced by children under the influence of the cursed beans. Even his supposed escape and return home can be understood as the final delusions of a dying mind, desperate to believe in survival even as life ebbs away. The traditional ending, where Jack cuts down the beanstalk and kills the giant, represents the moment of death itself. The falling giant is Jack's own body, plummeting from the ritual pole as his soul departs for the underworld. The supposed victory over evil is actually the triumph of death over life, the successful completion of an ancient sacrifice that has claimed countless victims. Modern retellings have transformed this tale of ritualistic murder into a children's story, but the original horror remains encoded in its structure. Every time a child hears about Jack climbing the beanstalk, they're unknowingly experiencing an echo of humanity's darkest practices, a reminder of the terrible price our ancestors paid to appease their hungry gods. Jack didn't escape the giant's realm. He became part of it, his spirit joining the collective of sacrificial victims whose screams still echo from that cursed castle in the clouds. And somewhere, in the depths of our ancestral memory, we still hear those screams, still feel the chill of recognition when the giant chants his ancient words of hunger and death. Chapter 5. Whispers from the Grave. The story of Jack and the Beanstalk has survived for over 5,000 years, not because it's charming, but because it serves as humanity's darkest confession. Hidden beneath the fairy tale veneer lies a testament to our species' capacity for unimaginable cruelty, a preserved memory of the ritualistic horrors that once defined human civilization. This tale is part of a vast network of stories that encode the memories of prehistoric death cults, each one preserving fragments of ancient practices that modern society would find incomprehensible. From the cannibalistic rituals of early Germanic tribes to the child sacrifice ceremonies of pre-Columbian cultures, these stories serve as living archives of humanity's most shameful chapters. The persistence of Jack's tale across cultures and centuries reveals something deeply disturbing about human nature. We are drawn to stories of innocence corrupted, of children consumed by ancient evils, because somewhere in our genetic memory we remember being both victim and perpetrator in these horrific ceremonies. The story speaks to a primal fear that runs deeper than rational thought, a terror rooted in ancestral trauma. Archaeological evidence continues to emerge that supports the dark origins of this tale. Recent excavations in Romania have uncovered a massive ritual complex dating back over 4,000 years, complete with sacrifice chambers and evidence of systematic child murder on an industrial scale. The site contains thousands of small skeletons, arranged in patterns that suggest ritualistic consumption designed to feed supernatural entities. Chemical analysis of the bones reveals traces of hallucinogenic compounds consistent with the cursed beans described in ancient versions of Jack's story. These children were drugged before their deaths, their minds altered to make them compliant during the final ceremony. The drugs would have induced vivid hallucinations of climbing toward the sky, encountering giant beings, and receiving magical treasures, exactly as described in the traditional tale. But perhaps most chilling of all is the discovery that these practices didn't end with the ancient world. Isolated communities across Eastern Europe continued performing modified versions of these ceremonies well into the medieval period, adapting the ancient death magic to serve different beliefs while maintaining its essential horror. Records from the 13th century describe communities where children would periodically disappear, vanishing during the night when mysterious plants were said to grow near local graveyards. These plants, described as reaching impossible heights overnight, were believed to be pathways to the underworld. Children who investigated these phenomena were never seen again, their fate whispered about in hushed tones by terrified villagers. Religious authorities actively suppressed knowledge of these practices, burning records and executing anyone found participating in the ancient ceremonies. But the stories survived, passed down through oral tradition, and gradually sanitized into the fairy tales we know today. The horror was hidden, but never completely erased. Modern psychological studies reveal that exposure to Jack's story during childhood creates lasting neurological changes, activating ancient fear responses encoded in human DNA. Children who hear the tale consistently report nightmares involving climbing plants, giant figures, and cannibalistic threats. These aren't learned responses. They're genetic memories, inherited trauma passed down through thousands of generations. The story's continued popularity in modern media reflects our subconscious fascination with the very practices that once terrorized our ancestors. Every retelling of Jack's tale is an act of cultural memory, a recognition of the darkness that lies at the heart of human civilization. But the most disturbing aspect of this ancient legacy is its potential for resurrection. Throughout history, periods of social chaos and economic collapse have seen the return of ritualistic practices thought long extinct. The fundamental human impulse to sacrifice innocence in exchange for supernatural power remains dormant in our collective psyche, waiting for the right conditions to emerge once again. The beans have been planted in modern soil, nourished by centuries of retelling and reinforced by genetic memory. The beanstalk of ancient horror continues to grow, reaching toward a future where the old ways might once again claim dominion over human hearts. And at the top of that impossible plant, something ancient and hungry waits with infinite patience, knowing that eventually, inevitably, humanity will remember its true nature and climb once more toward the darkness that spawned it. Jack's story isn't just a fairy tale. It's a warning, a reminder of what we were and what we might become again. The giant's chant still echoes across the centuries, and in the depths of night, when civilization's thin veneer begins to crack, we can still hear those ancient words of hunger and death, calling to us from the shadows of our forgotten past. The most terrifying aspect of this ancient legacy lies in its gradual resurgence in modern times. Across remote villages in Eastern Europe, reports continue to surface of children vanishing during nights when strange plants appear near ancient burial grounds. Local authorities dismiss these accounts as folklore, but the pattern remains disturbingly consistent. Each disappearance coincides with the discovery of massive vines that grow to impossible heights overnight, only to wither and die by dawn. In the deep forests of Romania, hikers have reported finding circles of blackened earth where nothing will grow, surrounded by the scattered remains of what appear to be climbing structures made from human bones. Carbon dating on these sites reveals ages spanning thousands of years, suggesting continuous use by successive generations of death cults. The soil analysis shows traces of the same hallucinogenic compounds found in ancient sacrificial sites, indicating that the old ceremonies never truly ended. Even more disturbing are the psychological studies conducted on children from these regions. Without any prior exposure to Jack's tale, they consistently draw pictures of giant figures consuming small humans, towering plants reaching into dark skies, and underground chambers filled with bones. These images emerge from their subconscious minds like genetic memories, inherited trauma passed down through countless generations of survivors. The modern world has tried to bury this darkness beneath layers of civilization and rationality, but the hunger of the ancient gods remains undiminished. They wait in the spaces between sleep and waking, in the forgotten corners of human consciousness where primal fears still hold dominion. And somewhere, in a castle that exists beyond the reach of mortal understanding, the giant continues his eternal feast, sustained by the spiritual essence of every child who has ever climbed toward the clouds and never returned. The beans have been scattered across the modern world, taking root in fertile ground prepared by centuries of retelling. Soon, the beanstalks will grow again, reaching toward a sky filled with ancient hunger. And when they do, humanity will remember its true purpose, its original covenant with the gods of death and darkness. The giant is waiting. He has always been waiting, and soon, very soon, the children will climb again,